In this lecture, we're going to explore a very simple principle, which is that we really never stop communicating. We communicate continuously, even the interactions that we don't intend, right? Like choosing not to interact with somebody is still going to send a message to somebody else. Some examples may include, for instance, not replying to a text message, crossing your arms, wearing pajamas when you go to Walmart, choosing to go out to dinner by yourself, or as a student when you come into a classroom, choosing to sit in the front row or the back row. None of these things involve spoken words, but they all send a message and they all influence how others may interpret us. So the first lesson here is that we don't have any control over what other people might interpret. We can only control what we express, what we choose to express, how we behave. But how others interpret that behavior is entirely up to them. So communication is a continuous act. What I mean by that is even if we don't realize that we're communicating with another person, I may not even be aware of somebody else in my realm. But if they perceive me, then everything I do is still a perception of communication. And so that can feel a little overwhelming. It's like, where does the line get drawn? And it doesn't. We don't have a choice in it. What we can do is try to just be more intentional with our communication, to be aware of the people who are around us, and to be aware of the fact that everything we do, whether we intend it or not, is going to send a message. When I'm in the classroom, I'll often ask students, is there anything I can do to not communicate with you? And inevitably somebody will say, well, you can leave the room. And so I do. I walk out of the room. I don't slam the door, make a big scene. I just leave. And I kind of stand around the corner for a minute and then I poke my head in and I come back in and I say, did I still communicate something? And they say, yes, you did. And they may have different interpretations of that communication, but I still communicated something. So we have to remember that even the choice not to interact with people is still sending information. We can't control what other people conclude from that communication. We have no control whatsoever over somebody else's perception of us or our communication. We can only control how we ourselves behave. So I want you to remember that very important principle. You can only control your own communication. You can't control what other people perceive of that communication. Let's break down some of the different channels of communication that we might use as we are engaging in this continuous act that we have zero control over. So we're going to start off with verbal communication, which is the words that we use. Now, verbal communication also does include written communication because we are writing language, but we'll start with just the vocalized language. And so it's the words that we choose to use or not use. For instance, if we choose to speak with various slang that may be understood really well with our peers, but maybe not so much with our parents or grandparents. If we choose to use curse words, I'll be honest with you, I love to curse, but I have to know when and where to do it. I generally try not to curse in the classroom because I have to have a cognizance and an awareness about what is professional and what is not. Now, I will say sometimes I let one drop. Often I do it to make sure people are still paying attention. But for the most part, I'm not swearing as a professional in the classroom, certainly not in meetings or with colleagues. You have to know what words you should choose to use in certain settings and what ones maybe are less appropriate. And that's a part of our intentional communication. We might choose to communicate through storytelling. Some of us are natural storytellers. Some of us are terrible storytellers. Everybody knows a terrible storyteller. They might start in the middle of the story and then back up and wait, I forgot to explain this other thing. Or their stories go on and on. They give every single detail or they don't give any details. Again, we don't have a choice in how others interpret our storytelling or our communication. And similar with humor, some of us are really funny, others not so much. Some of us think we're really funny, others may not find us funny. And I think that there are a lot of factors involved there. And so we have to remember when we verbally communicate using humor, that may not be widely recognized as being humorous. The choice to self-disclose is a big one. So to self-disclose is to share information about ourselves that is not known or that we perceive as not known by the other person. And it doesn't have to be a big secret. It can just be like, hey, I don't think you know this about me. Let me tell you about myself. And when we do that, what we do is we actually build trust with other people. And in particular, we build trust when we also allow for them to self-disclose. And so the process of asking them questions. What about you? Does this apply to you? And allowing for balance in conversation. So not monopolizing the conversation, but allowing everybody involved to have equity and an opportunity to share as well. All of these things are a part of healthy verbal communication. And when we engage in them with care and thought, we also then create a stronger intention in our communication. And hopefully we get a better outcome. Now, we also have written communication. I mentioned before, written communication and verbal communication are in the same arena because they both use words. So written forms of communication can certainly be email and text. It can also be through various apps like Slack and Discord and various social media, but it can also be in the form of handwriting, letter writing, journaling. All of these things are written forms of communication. All right, we also have some nonverbal communication channels. Some of them, though, may be somewhat surprising. We did just talk about verbal communication and the word that we choose, but what about the tone of voice, the volume, the pace at which we speak? All of those things are nonverbal communication. The vocalization, sighing, for instance, that's nonverbal communication, right? It's not based in language. And of course, facial expressions, body language, gesturing, how much space we take up, how we dress, and how we decorate our environment. All of these things are nonverbal in nature, but I like to explore it in a slightly different way. It's a little bit more nuanced because not all nonverbal communication requires sight. Visual communication requires sight. So when we choose certain outfits, when we decorate a space, what we put on our Instagram or our other social media pages, how we decorate a PowerPoint, et cetera, all of these things are a form of visual communication. All right, last but not least, digital communication. And I leave this one for the end because digital communication could be verbal, it could be nonverbal. Sometimes it's both, right? So we are maintaining relationships constantly using digital forms of communication. Every time we send somebody an instant message, every time we use FaceTime, every time we post to social media or upload a TikTok video or respond to a video or share a location, offer an emoji, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things are a form of digital communication. So when I like somebody's post or if I give a reaction to somebody's text, this is nonverbal and it's visual and it's digital. So we have multiple channels of communication expressing one thing in the simple form of a thumbs up to somebody's message. Silence can also be a powerful communicator. Now, silence is actually nonverbal, right? Because there's no vocalization, there's no words involved. Digital silence can certainly be a thing, but silence is a powerful communicator because sometimes it's intentional, right? I'm angry at you, or I'm showing respect in this moment, or I'm embarrassed, or I'm comfortable. But we have to remember that the meaning behind it is what really matters. So think for just a minute in terms of like the difference between comfort and discomfort. So the fact is that in some relationships, healthy relationships, silence can feel like a comfortable thing. But when we're in newer relationships, silence can feel somewhat threatening. It can make us nervous. Why don't we have anything to talk about? But it's important to remember that one person may perceive it one way while another perceives it a different way. What feels like comfortable silence to me could feel threatening to you. All right, so we're going to finish with a section that I call Behind the Behaviors. I'm going to be diving into a psychological principle, a theory, or a definition that helps us to better understand what we just learned. And in today's lecture, the psychological theory that we're exploring is the fundamental attribution error. Now, this particular theory is one that comes out of a book that was written in 1979 by Lee Ross, in which the author describes people's tendency to overestimate their explanations for another person's behavior while underestimating situational influences. And so some examples of that might be like, if somebody doesn't text me back, first interpretation might be, oh, they don't care about what I had to say, or they're angry at me. But an alternative explanation could be like, they're busy, they're overwhelmed, they're depressed, they saw it and they forgot, their phone died, whatever. The behavior is identical. The meaning of the behavior is not. And so when we're talking about the fundamental attribution error, remember that we tend to explain other people's behavior based on their character, based on their personality. But we tend to explain our own behavior based on the situation because we understand why we did what we did because we did it. We can't understand why somebody else did what they did because we didn't do it. They did. And so there is an automatic bias that leads to really quick judgments about other people's character. It can increase conflict. It can reduce empathy. And it can also lead, when we are able to recognize that this is what's going on, it allows for a more accurate perception, and that leads to healthier relationships. And so the next time you find yourself in a situation like this, be careful of assuming who somebody is and instead ask what might be going on. And that might get you past the behavior and into the perception.